Tonight, we will embark on a gentle journey, not toward any particular destination, but a return to presence. Together, we will listen to the timeless wisdom of the Buddha teachings that have served as a refuge for countless restless souls for over 2.5 millennia. These are not rules to follow, nor doctrines to memorize. They are invitations, inviting you to see things in a different light, inviting you to loosen your tightly held grip and to discover the deep well of peace that has always been within you. We will walk this path through ancient stories, through simple yet profound truths. Truths that do not aim for the noisy mind, but instead awaken the quiet heart within. Tonight, we will learn to see thoughts as clouds drifting by and difficult emotions not as enemies, but as messengers gently knocking, inviting us to come closer to healing and stillness. Before we step into tonight's healing meditation stories, if you love these quiet moments where each story brings you back to peace and deep understanding, please consider subscribing to the channel so that every night when you need a moment of calm, I can be here to share another story with you. As light as a breath, and as warm as a candle in the long, dark night. Now I invite you to gently close your eyes, take a deep breath in, and join me as we begin the journey back to your own heart. Perhaps peace was never about where we are going, but about how we walk. When we allow ourselves to slow down, the world around us begins to soften too. The wind grows quieter, the light becomes warmer, and even old sorrows feel as light as clouds fading in the sky. In this first breath of the night, let us let go of all the musts and shoulds, all the unfinished tasks, all the heaviness that weighs on the heart. There is no need to strive to be better, no need to chase enlightenment somewhere far away. All we need is to be fully present in this moment where breath flows in and out, where the heart gently beats, where life itself is quietly smiling. And now, as the mind begins to settle, I invite you to listen to the first story of the night, a small story like a soft breeze gliding across a still lake, yet enough to awaken the stillness deep within you. The story, the lamp, and the wind. In a small hermitage on the hillside, the evening began with the scent of dry wood and the sound of insects like a gentle clock counting each pulse of night. The little room had only a low wooden table, a water jar, a ceramic bowl, and an oil lamp placed neatly on a shelf in the corner. That lamp had weathered many rainy and sunny seasons, its glass smoky, yet still clear enough for light to escape like warm milk. Every time dusk settled, the junior monk arrived to trim the wick, pour the oil, and light the flame. The small flame flickered for a moment, then stood still, forming a slender tower of light in the quiet space. When the lamp glowed, the room was no longer fully dark, but softened like a stream flowing through the mountain's slumber. Everything suddenly had an outline, a form of breath. It was the moment the teacher often sat down, hands resting over his belly, spine straight, yet relaxed eyes half closed, as if gazing into a sky between his eyelids. That night, the wind blew stronger than usual. From a distant valley, the wind rose along the grassy slope, touched the pine grove, skimmed over the mossy tiled roof, then slipped into the hermitage through narrow gaps in the wooden frame of the window. The lamp that stood still suddenly tilted its head. The light wavered. The shadows on the wall trembled like leaves being gently stirred. The junior monk watched the lamp in his eyes, flickering a nameless fear. Since joining the monastery, he had lived with the steadiness of everything. The morning bell, the walking meditation steps, the silent counted breath, the warm vegetarian meal, and at night, the lamp always shining peacefully. He thought, if the lamp went out, then darkness would rush in, sweeping away the fragile peace he held. He stepped closer, cupped his hands around the flame, as though protecting something precious. The light held still for a moment, but soon another gust entered, lifting the curtain of calmness. The lamp swayed, casting his long shadow on the wall, like a tree bent in a storm. The teacher opened his eyes, watched that scene for a long while without speaking. In his eyes, which had seen much impermanence, there was a kindness, like the surface of a lake after rain. Then he said to close the window a little, so the wind has a path, but not one that blows directly into the lamp. The junior monk did as told, yet his heart remained unsettled. He slid the wooden window panel, leaving a small crack. The wind changed direction, no longer rushing into the lamp, but drifting along the wall, then falling to the floor like a soft sigh. The flame calmed, though that faint trembling remained, as if remembering the wind outside, and that it might return at any moment. He stood for a while, then sat down beside the teacher. Near the teacher, he felt a warmth not from the lamp, but from the presence of someone who had sat so quietly for decades. The teacher asked if he feared the lamp going out. The junior monk nodded. The teacher asked what would happen if the lamp went out. He answered that it would become dark, hard to see. He would feel lost. The teacher asked if he was certain that darkness was the enemy. The junior monk fell silent. When he was still in his village every night, there were long stretches of darkness chasing him on the way from the paddy field home. he had run because of barking dogs, drunk people's voices, a shadow at the end of the path. Darkness made all shape lose form, made the mind run wild. When he entered the monastery, he thought he had left those fears behind. But the wind blew in, and a little sway of the lamp was enough to summon a whole crowd of old shadows, as when someone calls a name, then finds a whole lineage answering. The teacher placed his hand on the lamp shelf, gently turned the lamp just a little so that the wick did not lean. He said that the wind did not come to extinguish the lamp. The wind simply travels its own path. The lamp was not born to fight the wind. It was only doing its work, shining within its capacity. When the wind passes by, the lamp sways. When the wind is still, the lamp is still again. That swaying is neither the wind's fault nor the lamp's fault. It is simply the result of a meeting. Just like in the human heart, when a thought passes by, the mind sways. When a strong emotion passes by, the heart trembles. That trembling is not a fault, much less a sign that you have failed your practice. It is simply the truth of a life that still knows feeling. The junior monk asked if there was any way for the lamp not to sway. The teacher smiled. He said there are two common routes. One is to build the wall so tightly sealed that no wind gets in anymore. The other is to extinguish the lamp so the wind can do what it wants, and you do not have to witness it. Both ways carry a cost. When you seal the walls too tight, the air in the room becomes stifled. The light may remain, but the human mind becomes weary. When you extinguish the lamp, you no longer see the sway, but you also no longer see your way. Then the teacher pointed to the gap the junior monk had left in the window. The wind still passes by, but does not rush in. The lamp still sways very slightly, like a blink of someone dreaming. The teacher said the third path is to learn how to open a gap just enough for wind to pass, just enough for the lamp to breathe, and for you to have the opportunity to see life working in its way. The junior monk looked at the lamp, saw that it was indeed still trembling a little. But within that tremble, there was a strange beauty. The light stretched thin across each breeze, like a gentle stringed instrument struck, then released. The shadow of the ceramic bowl on the wall no longer jittered wildly, but swung slowly, like the rhythm of a hammock. For the first time, he realized that peace is not standing still, but being able to move without losing oneself. Just like a swimmer does not need perfectly calm water, they can remain afloat amid waves because they trust each breath and each movement of their body. He silently repeated this in his heart may be able to move without losing oneself. Outside, the sound of the pines on the hillside conversed in a long, soft language. Clusters of leaves brushing each other made a sound like voices whispering in a distant kitchen. The scent of damp earth after the afternoon rain slipped through the window, mingling with the smell of lamp oil and old wood. All of it blended into a wordless song. The teacher sat quietly, listening to that song. The junior monk also sat quietly, but only for a moment. His mind wandered back to memories. He recalled his mother in the village, the little garden, the rice harvest behind the house, his father, who spoke little. He remembered the final evening before leaving the village, his mother lighting a lamp on the ancestral altar. That lamp had also flickered because of wind from the window and the deep sigh of someone about to send their child away. He suddenly understood that perhaps from that day on, the lamp had been a guiding thread through his uneasy seasons. And because he loved so much the warmth that lamp gave, he had always feared the wind. The teacher, as though reading the flow in the junior monk's eyes, said, "Try to see the wind as a visiting friend. That friend does not stay long, makes no promises, brings no gifts. But each time they pass by, they remind you that everything is alive. The window shakes because the house still has windows. The bamboo leaf rustles because the tree still draws sap. The lamp wick sways because the fire is still breathing. And your heart trembles because it has not turned to stone. If you look at the wind as a destroyer, you only see chaos and want to run away. If you look at the wind as a reminder, you can smile and adjust gently, like turning the lamp body, like closing a door a little, like stepping back a little to hear your breath. The junior monk asked how to adjust himself when the wind is thoughts and emotions that come unannounced. The teacher said, "Start by naming the breath. When a gust blows into your mind before you chase it, place your hand lightly on your belly and name your breath. In the inhale, know that you are inhaling. In the exhale, know that you are exhaling. Do not try to change it immediately. Just know. Knowing is enough to give you an anchor. From that anchor, you will see that the wind is only a movement. It comes and it goes in its own way. If you rush to resist it, you give it extra strength from your own fear. If you surrender, you hand it the power to lead. But if you know without panic, you will see that you are still sitting here, and the wind is only a passing guest. The night deepened. The lamp no longer held the fresh golden glow of when it was first lit, but had become the color of ripe honey. Everything in the room seemed covered in a layer of softness. The teacher told the young monk a story from long ago. There was a pupil who was very afraid of losing the lamp, so every night he kept watch. Whenever the wind stirred, he would rise to shield it. Whenever the wick tilted, he would adjust it. Whenever the oil dwindled, he would refill it. After many nights, he grew tired and began to hate the wind and even to hate the lamp. His teacher simply took the lamp out to the porch, placed it amidst the cool breeze, and told him to sit down. At first, the flame flickered violently. At times, it seemed it might go out. But after a while, when the wick had become evenly warm, when the pupil had stopped breathing in panic from fear, the flame stood still, like someone with hands folded in front of the courtyard. From that point on, he no longer kept watch over the lamp. He learned how to watch his own breath. The young monk listened and felt a light space open in his heart. He recalled how many times he had lost his peace simply by trying to hold everything absolutely still. While tending the garden, he despised fallen leaves, strove to pick them all up. Then the wind dropped another layer, and he became irritated. While sweeping the house, he wanted the wooden floor to shine like glass. Then someone walked across and left footprints, and he was annoyed. He understood that his mind once sought a kind of sterile stillness, a kind of arrangement so exact it was hard to breathe in. That kind of peace was like sealing a wall too tight, and in the end became stifling. He looked at the lamp silently, telling it that from tonight on he would allow it the right to sway a little, so that he himself could learn how to be still, even in the sway. Around midnight, the wind outside changed voice. No longer rushed it, became round and soft, like someone singing an old song to lull a child. On the hilltop, thin clouds drifted lazily, giving space in the sky for a few stars to appear. The young monk heard the faint crackle of the lamp wick. It was the sound of oil meeting flame of matter, turning into light, of things visible, turning into something invisible, yet still seen by the eye. He suddenly realized that the story of the wind and the lamp was no longer just an example, but a truth unfolding before him. He placed his hand on his knee, released his fingers, felt the lamp's warmth on his skin like a greeting. The teacher rose, walked to the window, slightly opened it wider, not to challenge the lamp, but to give the night an extra path to breathe. A new breeze drifted in. The flame danced, then stood still again. The teacher turned back, looked at the young monk, and said, Now you can retell this story with your own breath. When the wind comes, you breathe in and you know. When the wind goes, you breathe out and you know. When the lamp sways, you smile and you know. When the lamp is still, you know. That knowing is the presence we spoke of at the beginning of the night. It does not resist, does not follow, does not ask why. It is simply there like a broad lake surface through which breezes pass without erasing the sky's reflection. He nodded. In that nod was a silent promise. From tomorrow on, when sweeping the courtyard, he would not hurry to pick every fallen leaf. He would watch where a leaf falls and see if that's the leaf's proper place. When someone walks across the floor, leaving footprints, he will smile because the floor is there for people to walk on. When an old gust of memory or sorrow suddenly arises in his heart, he will place his hand on his belly and call his breath by name. The wind may still make him sway, but he knows he is learning the art of swaying without breaking. The night was late. The teacher told him to extinguish the lamp and rest. That sentence made the young monk's shoulders slump a little, as though the old habit wanted to cling. But he reminded himself that darkness is not the enemy. He blew gently. The flame went out. In the darkness that followed, the first thing he heard was his own breath. Without the lamp's light, the breath seemed amplified, clear, rhythmic. Outside, the wind still moved, but now it was no longer a worry. It was a late arriving friend passing by the porch, leaving a good night wish in the language of leaves and sky. The next morning, before the sun had yet climbed above the hillside, the young monk was already awake. He took the lamp outside to clean its glass wipe, the wick pour fresh oil. The early sunshine caught on the glass surface as a thin film, making the lamp look like freshly washed fruit. He placed the lamp on the step at the door, looked at it for a moment. He suddenly understood that this lamp was not just a tool for darkness. It was a little teacher. It taught him how to live among the winds of life, how to care for the fragile without turning it into something imprisoned, how to open a gap just enough so both wind and light have paths. The day passed in small tasks, sweeping the yard, carrying water, chopping vegetables, lighting the stove. In each task, he tried placing a breath as the marker, like someone bookmarking a favorite page. When he was tired, he stopped, looked out to the hill. The pine trees did not leave their stance because of the wind. They simply bowed in rhythm, passed down from the sky. He suddenly felt compassion for the trees, for the wind, and even for himself of the past days, who insisted on standing so rigid and straight only because of fear of bending. Bending is also a way to stand. Swaying is also a way to be still. Night fell again. The young monk lit the lamp earlier than usual. He sat there, neither waiting for the wind nor hoping it would stay away. He just watched the lamp. His gaze was no longer tense, but full, like a bowl able to hold both water and empty space. The teacher entered, saw him sitting still, and nodded lightly. The two sat like that until the late night bell rang. There were footsteps of a pilgrim seeking shelter, clinking of bowls from the kitchen, preparations, a cat curled on the mat, letting out a long breath. All of it wove into a fabric of the night. In the middle of that fabric, the lamp did not need to try harder to shine, and the wind did not need to strive to be still. Each did its part, and that part, when seen through presence, naturally became beautiful. The story of the lamp and the wind will one day be told by the young monk to others in his own way. Maybe he will not use lofty words. He will simply say that one night the wind was strong, the lamp swayed, my heart swayed too, and then I learned how to close a window a little and open a gap inside my chest. He will point to the breath and say, "This is the tether that ties the boat to the shore." He will point to the lamp and say, "This is the lesson of how to be still and yet soft." He will point to the porch and say, "That is the path the wind takes, and we do not have to chase after it to know that we are still here." There will be other nights, nights with greater winds, heavy storms, more chaotic lamp swaying. Every teaching has its difficult moments, but from that gentle night, the young monk already has a landmark to return to. Every time the sway becomes too much, he remembers to turn the lamp in his inner world. Remember to close a door that is impulse and open a gap that is compassion. He knows that perfection is not always possible, but every time he remembers, he again feels warmth. That warmth is not just from the lamp, but from a small but persistent trust that he does not need to chase away the wind. To be at peace, he only needs to learn how to live with the wind without leaving home. When the seasons change, when flocks of migratory birds trace long arcs in the sky, when guests come and go, the small hermitage on the hillside remains there. The glass lamp still stands on the shelf, a small object amid countless stories. Some nights it shines for an elder seeking a place to sleep. Some nights it lights the hands searching for a bowl. Some nights it simply sits there and keeps company with the breath of two people learning how to listen. Every time the wind passes, it nods as though greeting a long-lost friend. Every time the wind is still, it stands upright, like a milestone at the entrance. No need for pride when standing straight, no need for shame when swaying. The lamp simply does what a lamp does. The wind simply does what wind does. And a human simply needs to be human to know how to breathe, how to see, how to smile. The story does not truly end here, because in truth, it has no definitive ending. Each night that the lamp is lit is a new beginning. Each breeze that passes through is a new development. Each conscious breath is a temporary conclusion, only to open a new chapter a moment later. If there is one thing that could be considered a message, it might be this: peace is not found by sealing every door, but by knowing how to open just enough of a gap. Awareness is not about killing emotions, but about knowing how to call them by name when they arrive. Freedom is not in running away from the wind, but in learning to walk with it, while still hearing your own voice. On a much later night, when the young monk has lived through several more seasons of falling leaves, he will sit again before the lamp and remember the version of himself from that earlier night. He will smile, realizing that everything was in fact simple. When we are gentle enough with ourselves, the wind is no longer a threat. When we are honest enough with our breath, the darkness is no longer a terrifying emptiness. The lamp, the wind, and the human in between are all learning the same lesson: to remain in this moment just as it is. And from that, a quiet kind of peace begins to spread like the soft light of a small lamp, just enough for the person beside it to recognize their own face. The story, the potter, and the season of white ash. Morning in the village began with the crowing of roosters by the riverside, the echo stretching out like a thin thread, linking the rooftops still wet with dew. At the end of the village stood an old pottery kiln, its brown tile roof, smoke rising in delicate wisps. The villagers called it the kiln of Mr. Lamb. He had lived alone for many years. No wife, no children, only a potter's wheel, a few baskets of clay, a firing kiln, and an old gray cat named Mitt. Every morning, he started the fire very early. The smoke mingled with the mist, so the land around the kiln seemed to breathe. His hands were calloused and cracked, but when he touched the clay, they became gentle, as one who was soothing a child. In that village, many people did not understand why he still made pottery, though few bought his wares anymore. In these times, people preferred plastic, preferred things cheap and shiny. The bowls, the teapots, the vases he made were rough, uneven, many with crack lines. Some said he was old-fashioned. Some said he was stubborn. He did not argue. He only smiled kindly. Whenever asked, he said simply, "I do not make pottery to sell. I make it to hear what the clay says." One day, a young man from the city came named Kai. He had heard that in the village there was a potter who could make objects that when you poured water in, you heard a strange sound. He visited Mr. Lamb carrying a camera and a notebook. When they met, Kai bowed, asked permission to learn for a few days. Mr. Lamb looked at him a long time, then said, "You may learn, but you must leave behind everything you already know." Kai was taken aback and asked if we do not use knowledge. How will we learn? Mr. Lamb merely pointed to his hands and said, "By this." Then he pointed to his chest and said, "And by this." On the first day, he would not allow Kai to touch the clay. He told him only to sit and watch. Kai sat all morning, watching. Mr. Lamb took clay from the soaking pit, kneaded it gently and thoroughly. He placed each lump on the potter's wheel, his hands dripping wet. The wheel turned steadily. His hands slowly drew the clay up, shaping it. Whenever the surface cracked slightly, he paused and with his finger smoothed it. Kai watched entranced. He forgot all note-taking. He expected Mr. Lamb to explain, but all morning the man was silent. At noon, he quenched the fire, sat on the porch drinking tea. He asked Kai what he saw. Kai said he saw the hands of the potter were so skillful, how the clay spun softly, like it carried music. Mr. Lamb smiled and said, "If you see the hands, you have not seen anything yet. When you see the clay turning by itself, that is when you begin to learn." Kai looked puzzled. There was no further explanation. In the following days, Mr. Lamb let him knead the clay. The clay stuck to Kai's hands. It was flexible, yet heavy. He tried to mimic the potter's movements, but the clay kept deforming. He grew frustrated and asked why I cannot do it. After so much effort, Mr. Lamb said, "Simply because you are trying to make the clay into something, rather than letting the clay become what it already is." Kai asked, "But is not the potter the one who creates the form?" He replied, "Yes, but a skillful potter does not force the clay to his idea, but helps the clay find the form it already holds within." One afternoon, as the sun slanted over the kiln's roof, Mr. Lamb told him to go to the riverbank and fetch water. The river's water that season was clear and slow-flowing. He scooped a ladle of water, splashed it lightly onto the clay beside him, and said, Any clay that will drink the water without cracking, that clay is worthy of becoming pottery. Kai tried with his clay, but each one cracked. Mr. Lamb looked, then said, "The fault is not with the clay, it is the fault of the gaze." He asked, "How should one look properly?" He answered, "You must look until the clay is silent. When you look with your eyes, you see the surface. When you look with your heart, you see the inside. Clay is like a person. Touch the right place, and it softens. Touch wrongly, and it resists." After 7 days, Kai finally made a round bowl, not beautiful, but stable. Mr. Lamb told him to fire it. The kiln fire glowed red. Logs crackled. He said in the fire, "The clay will tell you what it wishes to become." Kai asked, "How can the clay speak?" He only smiled and said, "When you know how to listen, everything speaks." That night, Kai stayed awake by the kiln. He watched the fire, saw the flame twist like a dancer, sometimes rising high, sometimes calming. The smell of burning clay, dry wood ash, blended into a very strange scent. He sat still, no note-taking, no thinking. In his mind was only the sound of the fire, his own breathing, and the crackling like the heartbeat of the night. The next morning, when Mr. Lamb opened the kiln, Kai's bowl had cracked in two. He felt sad. Mr. Lamb looked and said, "Good for you, have learned the first lesson. Not everything that cracks is ruined. Some cracks are the clay's story." From that day on, he no longer hurried. He made fewer pieces, more slowly. Whenever he put his hands on the clay, he closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and only then began to shape. One time, Mr. Lamb asked, "What are you thinking today as you work?" He said, "I am not thinking anything." Mr. Lamb nodded and said, "Good for the clay does not understand the language of thoughts. It only understands the language of presence." The next month, the weather brought heavy rain. The kiln's roof leaked. He had to cover it with banana leaf mats. One noon, strong gusts, heavy rainwater, running in a stream before the door. Kai rushed to collect equipment. Mr. Lamb sat inside the kiln, watching the fire weakening. He said, "Let the wind do its course. Do not fear. If the fire goes out, we will ignite it again. But if you fear and shut the doors too tightly, the fire will suffocate." Kai understood, remembering the story of the lamp and the wind the teacher once told long ago. That afternoon, the fire truly went out. But next morning, he relit it as smoke rose. Once again, he said, "See, nothing is utterly lost, only changing form. Yesterday's fire lies in the ash. The ash nourishes today's fire." Time passed. Kai stayed longer at the pottery than he intended. He gradually forgot the sound of vehicles, the ring of phones, even the clock. His day had only 2 rhythms, morning and evening, like 2 breaths. One day, Mr. Lamb called him and said, "Today, I will let you hear the singing of the pottery." He took an old vase, poured water in, then tapped gently with his fingertip. A sound rang out, round deep, long like a bell. He said, "That sound appears only when the pottery has been made in stillness. If the hands shook, if the heart burned, the sound would be harsh and dull. When the heart is calm, the pottery sings in the voice of the water." He tried tapping on his own pot, but only heard a dry, harsh sound. Mr. Lamb said, "Do not be discouraged. When your heart is still enough, the song will come. A song does not need a singer, only someone who knows how to listen." By the end of autumn, Mr. Lamb's health began to fade. He spoke little, only motioning for Kai to do things in his place. One morning, he told Kai to light the fire, then sat on the porch. He gazed at the smoke eyes, distant. He shared that long ago, in his youth, he had traveled far, once dreamed of fame, once wanted to be known. But then he realized, no pot ever carries the name of its maker. Once it leaves your hands, it belongs to the wind, to the water, to the one who drinks from it. "That," he said, "is what brings me peace." Kai listened and felt a tightness in his throat. That afternoon, Mr. Lamb collapsed. The villagers took him to the clinic, but he never woke again. Before he passed, he had said, "When the ashes cool, mix them into the clay for your first batch. Because in the ash is the breath of your teacher, and in the clay is the path you will walk." After his passing, Kai stayed alone. He lit the fire as Mr. Lamb once did. His hands still trembled, but his heart had changed. He mixed the ash with the clay. The clay turned darker, more fragrant. He shaped each small bowl, placed them in the kiln. As the fire burned, he could hear, in the crackling, the voice of his teacher. He no longer sought perfection. He only wished to hear the pottery speak, hear the clay breathe, and feel his own heart quiet down. A year later, Kai left the village. He took with him only a single vase small enough to fit between both hands. On its surface was a fine crack. He did not fix it. He knew it was the place where the clay told the story of fire. Wherever he went, he placed the vase in his room. Whenever he poured water, he tapped it lightly to hear its tone. At times, within that ringing, he could feel the breath of his teacher, the smoke, the ashes, and the light of those early mornings by the kiln. Many years later, when he had grown old, Kai returned to the village. The pottery kiln had long turned to ash, overgrown with grass. He sat down at the old spot near the ground where the fire had once been kindled. He placed the vase down, poured water in, and tapped it softly. The sound still rang, not loud, but warm. He smiled, knowing he was no longer hearing with his ears, but with memory. A breeze rose from the riverside, carrying the scent of damp earth. In the wind, he could almost hear his teacher's voice. "You hear it now." He closed his eyes and sat still for a long time. When he opened them again, the hillside was bright with sunlight. On the grass, a gray cat was lying in the sun, looking very much like old Mitt. He stood, looked around his heart, light as smoke. He knew that in every lump of clay he had ever molded, in every pot that had ever come to life, there lived a part of the old fire, a part of the teacher who had gone, and a part of himself as he was now. The story of the potter and the season of white ash does not truly end, because when the fire in a person's heart has once burned, its ashes remain warm forever. Every time we do something with full presence, no matter how small, we are rekindling that fire. Every time we touch the earth or touch life with an unhurried hand and an uncalculating heart, we are hearing the pottery sing inside us. And that song, once it rises, needs no audience, because it itself is peace. The story, the teacher, and the old bell. The morning at the small temple, nestled deep in the valley, began with a very gentle light. That light did not come from the sun, but from the thin mist clinging to the tile roof, drifting softly around the pine branches, and gradually fading on the courtyard's brick slabs, worn by the years. In that space, the early bell rang. The sound was not loud, yet it carried far and penetrated deeply. It passed through layers of mist, entered every nook of the hills, like a gentle hand placed on the shoulder of a person who has just woken up. The teacher who rang the bell is named Tri Min. He had been at this temple for more than 20 years. His hair was already gray, his eyes kind, his steps slow. Every morning, he struck the bell exactly 3 times, then sat in silence for a moment before sweeping the courtyard, watering the flowers, and brewing tea. He did not speak much, but anyone who met him remembered his voice, slow, deep, and with something in it that made one's heart settle. One day, a young man came asking to stay at the temple for a few days. His name was Quan from the city. He said he wanted a quiet place to write, but inside, he was a tangled mess. He had just quit his job, just broken up with his partner, and everything around him felt meaningless. When he met the teacher, he simply bowed his head, asked to stay, then fell silent. The teacher looked at him, nodded, pointed to the small wooden house next to the meditation hall, and told him that place was vacant. On the first day, Quan stayed only in his room, did not go out. In the afternoon, hearing the bell, he opened the door and looked out. On the courtyard, the teacher was holding a mallet, striking the bronze body of the bell. Each ring sounded like a wave spreading across the space. Quan stood watching, felt something in his chest tremble, but quickly suppressed it. The next morning, the teacher knocked on his room. He handed him a broom and told him to sweep the courtyard together. Quan was a little surprised, but did not dare refuse. He took the broom, swept a few strokes. Dust flew up. The light shone in thin streaks. The teacher said, "When you sweep the courtyard, do not think you are doing work. Think you are sweeping within your heart. Each sweep of the broom is a breath. If you sweep in a hurry, the dust will fly back." Quan heard this, but did not speak. At noon, the teacher brewed tea, poured him a cup. The tea's scent was light, pure like new leaves. The teacher asked, "Did you hear the bell this morning?" Quan answered, "Yes," but he said he heard it like a metallic sound, and he did not understand why people felt peace in it. The teacher smiled. He said the bell's sound does not make people peaceful. It is the being present at the moment you hear the bell that makes the mind quiet. If you only hear with your ears, you will only hear the sound. If you listen with your heart, you will hear the silence between the two sounds. That silence is the place of peace. In the afternoon, it rained. Quan sat by the door, watching the teacher meditate under the eave. The rain fell, each drop falling on the old brick floor made small ripples. Quan saw the teacher did not move, even though the wind blew. The rain splashed gently on his robe. After a while, the teacher opened his eyes and turned to look at him. He said, "Let the rain fall when the rain falls. Let the wind blow when the wind blows." The unrest in you is not the rain or the wind. It is your habit of always wanting everything to stop. In the following days, the teacher gave Quan many small tasks. Sometimes cleaning the storage, sometimes wiping the altar table, sometimes helping build the fire. Each time he worked, the teacher reminded him, "Do not hurry." Quan initially felt impatient. He was used to a fast pace of life, to things needing to be finished, needing to achieve something. But here it seemed there was nothing to achieve. Everything drifted slowly, strangely. He began to feel a vague frustration. One evening, he asked the teacher, "Why do you not do much? Why just linger around the temple like this?" The teacher replied, "I still do something every day. You just do not see it. Every time I sweep the courtyard, I watch the leaves fall. Every time I strike the bell, I listen to the echo within my heart. Every time I cook rice, I watch the steam rise. I do not need to go anywhere to do anything, because there is always something to do as long as you are present." Quan listened, but he still did not understand. One morning, the teacher asked him to help clean the bronze bell. As Quan wiped around it with a cloth, he noticed a small crack along the lower edge. Concerned, he told the teacher. The teacher looked at it, nodded, and said, "That crack has been there for a long time." Quan asked why he had not fixed it. The teacher smiled and said, "If I weld it, the sound of the bell will change. The crack makes the bell softer but deeper. Just like in people, if you have never been cracked open, your voice will be hollow." From that day on, Quan began paying closer attention to the sound of the bell. Every morning when he heard it, he would sit still and do nothing else. At first, his mind was still full of thoughts, but gradually he started to hear the tiny echoes between the rings of the bell. Time seemed to slow down. One morning, he heard the bell and burst into tears. Not because he was sad or regretful, but because suddenly everything became transparent. The raindrop on the roof tile, the bird song on the branch, and his own breath all blended into one. The teacher walked over, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said nothing. After a moment, he softly said, "You have heard it now. The bell is not just a sound. It is a call to the present moment. Every time your mind wanders, the bell will call you back." In the following days, Quan began to write again. But he no longer wrote the way he used to. He no longer tried to craft beautiful sentences or tell a compelling story. He simply wrote about what was happening, about the sound of rain on the roof, the light on the wall, the smell of smoke from the evening kitchen. Every line was like a breath. He realized that writing was not about telling, but about reliving the moment one more time. One day, the teacher had a cough. Quan brewed tea and brought it to him. With a hoarse voice, the teacher said, "I will need to leave for a few days to visit an old friend at the temple down the mountain. While I am away, you should ring the bell every morning." Quan was surprised. He said, "I have never struck the bell before. How would I know how to do it?" The teacher replied, "Just strike it the way you breathe. When your breath is steady, the bell will be right. The next morning, the teacher left. Only Quan remained. He stood in front of the bell. The sky was still misty. He held the mallet, feeling his palm tremble slightly. He took a deep breath, then struck. The sound rang out not too loud, but round and warm. He closed his eyes, listening to the bell dissolve into the air. In that moment, he felt as if the teacher were still standing behind him. The teacher was gone for a week. During that time, Quan continued to strike the bell, to sweep the courtyard, to write, and to drink tea. Each evening, he sat and looked at the lake below the mountain. On the surface of the water, the moonlight reflected, and each gust of wind broke the image of the moon into hundreds of tiny pieces. He thought the moon never really breaks. It is only the surface that trembles, just like the human heart. When it becomes still, the moon becomes whole again. One morning, the teacher returned. He looked tired, but his eyes were still bright. He asked, "Did you hear the bell while you were striking it?" Quan replied, "Yes." The teacher smiled and said, "When you can hear the bell, even while you are the one striking it, then you are no longer the one who rings the bell. You have become the bell." Time passed, and Quan stayed at the temple longer than he had planned. When he was about to leave, the teacher gave him a small gift. It was a piece of bronze that had fallen from the crack in the old bell. The teacher said, "Take it with you, so you remember that every crack can still resonate." Quan held the piece of bronze in his hand. It felt cold, then gradually warmed. As he walked down the mountain, he looked back. The early morning light had spread across the valley. The sound of the bell from the temple echoed, fading slowly into the distance. He knew that sound would stay within him forever. Many years later, Quan was back in the city. He had a new job and lived a different, busy life. But every morning before he began his day, he paused for a few seconds, took a deep breath, and imagined the sound of the bell. He could still hear that sound in his heart, warm and full, like a small ring of light blooming outward. The story of the teacher and the old bell does not truly end. It continues every time someone pauses in the middle of life's rush, takes a deep breath, and listens to the invisible bell within. Whenever we feel tired, lost, or longing to return, that bell will ring again, not to tell us where to go, but to remind us that home is always here in this very breath. The story, The Watchmaker, and an Unhurried Morning. The morning on the small street began with the sound of a handcart's wheels rolling over the old brick pavement. A vendor's call rang out at the end of the road and then faded like a thin thread, drawing people out of their late sleep. The watch repair shop of Mr. Thuk sat right on the corner of a three-way intersection. The wooden sign hanging above the door had faded, yet the letters remained sharp. The glass door was slightly ajar. On the counter were small boxes holding screws and springs. At the corner of the bench stood a brass-handled magnifying glass, a warm yellow light casting a soft circle of glow. The rain from last night still lingered on the sidewalk. An early breeze blew gently, carrying the scent of damp earth and a touch of chill. Mr. Thuk was over 60. More hair was white than black, yet his eyes were bright and steady. Every morning, he cleaned the workbench, spread a smooth gray cloth, then reached for the tiny screw from the wristwatch mechanism of decades past. When he worked, he sat upright, breathing steadily. His left hand held the watch case. His right turned the screwdriver. The gentle sound of the watch hands brushing against metal was very small. If someone stood nearby, they might imagine the hush before rain begins to fall upon a flower bed. A boy had been standing at the door for some time. His name was Nam, about 13 years old, holding a plastic watch whose strap had broken. He felt shy, but flashed a bright smile. Mr. Thuk looked up and tapped lightly on the bench to signal him over. Nam handed the watch and explained it had fallen while running on the schoolyard. The old man did not quote a price immediately. He only told him to sit and wait. He took a small tray, removed the watch, back-placed each part in the tray, his hands working carefully as though ladling water without spilling a drop. Nam tilted his head and watched closely, then asked if it was difficult. The old man smiled and replied, "It was not difficult, just slow and in the correct sequence." He told a story from long ago when he was learning the trade. Back then, he was both hurried and afraid. Whenever the mechanism stopped, he would twist forcefully, and as a result, the gear popped out, the hands jumped wildly, screws scattered across the floor. From that, he learned that pulling harder does not make time run faster. It only breaks the things that need time to fall into place. Nam nodded, murmuring that being in a hurry will fix nothing. The man nodded and said, "Hurry only tires the hands and makes the heart pant." Sunlight filtered through the glass into thin streaks on the bench. On those light streaks were the old scratches that had turned into familiar patterns. A young teacher stepped in, holding a brown leather-strapped watch. She introduced herself as Ms. Han. She taught at the school just past the market and said the second hand sometimes stopped. The old man lifted the watch near his ear and listened for a minute, then nodded. He opened the back, found a small speck of dust caught between two gears. He took a fine brush, dusted a breath of air. The speck lifted like tiny raindrops, then vanished. He reassembled it, tested it, and the second hand ran smoothly. Miss Han smiled and thanked him. She wanted to pay right away, but he gently refused. He recorded the work in his ledger and said he would bill at the end of the month. She was surprised, asked why not take payment immediately. He answered that the morning still held plenty of breath, and there was no need to hurry. After she left, Nam asked how just one tiny piece of dust could stop the second hand entirely. He replied that even the smallest gear has its place. A little thing inserted in the wrong place can make the whole system stop. Life is like that too. A careless word, a distant look, a drop of nameless sadness, if held in, can make the other gears run off course. Nam stared, then said that at home he often avoids apologizing to his sister, and so small matters grow into big ones. The old man did not lecture at length. He just slid the tray closer and invited him to watch how he set the axle. Nam sat down. The old man's slow and steady motion made the boy breathe in rhythm with each long exhale. Mid-morning, a middle-aged man rushed in. He wore a white dress shirt, tie askew, sweat dotted his forehead. He raised an old watch, his father's. He said he had an important meeting this afternoon and wanted to wear it for confidence. The old man invited him to sit and poured a small pot of tea. The man hesitated, but the sound of boiling water made his trembling hand stop. He took a sip. The tea was golden, the scent of young leaves, warmth just right. Then the old man lifted the watch, opened it, and found the mainspring slipping. He adjusted it, turned a screw, and handed it back. The ticking returned, running beside the warmth of tea. The man bowed his head slightly in thanks. The old man said that sometimes repairing a watch does not happen inside the mechanism, but inside the person who wears it. The man smiled with moist eyes and left a small note. The old man folded it and tucked it into his old ledger. As the morning wound down, Nam asked to try inserting one gear into the practice movement. The old man agreed, reminding him to remember to breathe first, then act. Nam inhaled, exhaled, placed the gear in the right slot. The small hand returned to its position. The boy let out a quiet cheer. the old man said quietly, "But enough. In your hands, enough is just right." At midday, with no customers, the old man closed the door to block the draft and ate a simple lunchbox. White rice fried egg, steamed greens, a pinch of sesame salt. He ate slowly, chewed thoroughly. The wall clock ticked a steady rhythm, like background music. Nam asked why he didn't eat while working, just to go faster. The old man smiled and said, "People wait for a watch to be correct, but they also hope the craftsman does not misturn a screw." Eating slowly is his way of not misturning his life. In the afternoon, the sky turned to rain. The sound on the tin roof formed short sentences. Nam stood at the door, quietly talking about his mother, working far away. There were days she returned late, ate a steamed bun, then slept her heart pounding like a watch running fast. The old man paused, then told about his mother, many years ago, selling goods in the market. She did not own a fine watch, but her daily rhythm was the most precise clock. She arrived at the right time, smiled at the right time, cried at the right time. When he did not know what to do, he always returned to that rhythm, and then everything made sense again. The rain let up. The sidewalk felt cold. Mrs. Han turned back with her stack of exercise books. She asked whether the shop could stay open late tonight to fix a few of the students' plastic watches. He agreed. The shop that evening was brighter than usual. The children came in shyly, placing on the counter those scratched watches. He divided the work. Nam would remove the strap, Mrs. Han would clean the watch glass, and he would check the movement. The atmosphere was warm and gentle. Every time one watch started to tick again, the group giggled softly, like the small rain outside the porch. Late at night, Mrs. Han tidied up and thanked him profusely. Before leaving, she asked him why he could be so patient. He pointed to the wall clock that had accompanied him for decades. He said, "Patience is not standing still. Patience is knowing how to step slowly in the rhythm needed. The second hand still moves, but it does so in tiny increments." She nodded, hugged her stack of books, and promised she would bring over more broken ones the next day. Night fully set in. He turned off most of the lights, leaving only the yellow glow above the workbench. Nam lingered. He asked if in the future he could learn the craft. He asked the boy what he truly wanted to learn. Nam said he wanted to learn how not to be in a hurry. He smiled and said, then start by arriving 10 minutes early every morning to sweep the porch. Not to sweep the exterior dust, but to listen and see what remains inside. Nam whispered an okay. The next morning, Nam arrived really early. The street was still shrouded in mist. He picked up a broom and swept along the porch. Each stroke scratched softly in a pleasing way. He suddenly felt his breathing synchronize with the movement of his hand. He saw him open the door, watched him for a moment, and praised him neatly. Nam blushed from pleasure. He handed the boy a small notebook, told him to write one line each day. Write anything, so long as it is honest. Nam opened the first page and wrote, "This morning, the smell of rain still lingers on the tiles. My hands are less hasty." The day passed in small tasks, fixing straps, changing batteries, adjusting time, cleaning watch glasses. An elderly woman brought in a rusty bracelet watch. She said it belonged to her late husband. He accepted it, sat down carefully, polished. It replaced the clasp. When she put it on again, she looked at it for a long time, then gave a kind smile. She said now her wrist had his voice beside it. He bowed his head silently. Nam stood beside, inexplicably feeling a lump in his throat. One afternoon, a young man brought in an expensive watch, his voice sharp. He asked how long until it was done, and said if it was slow, he would take it elsewhere. He invited him to sit, poured tea, as for everyone. He declined, said he was in a hurry. He gently handed back the watch and said, "We will reschedule for another day," because right now, his hands are busy keeping time for another watch. The young man left in annoyance. Nam worried a little, afraid of losing clients. He said it is not every watch that needs us, and not we need every watch. What matters is the rhythm of our own work. If we trade it away for an appointment, we pay for it with a small mistake. A small mistake that shifts the whole day. The seasons changed. The sunlight became clear. Nam wrote more steadily. He noted the little things with clarity. The smell of tea this noon was light. His hands today shook a little more. The spring inside the old movement creaked, but still fit its slot. Those simple lines made him feel inside like a mind hand moving slowly but surely. One morning, he had a mild pain in his shoulder. He assigned Nam a tougher task, installing the central shaft for an ancient movement. Nam inhaled deeply, placed his hand screwdriver, touching the groove. At that moment, outside the door, a large vehicle passed. The workbench trembled slightly. He let go just in time. The hand did not slip. He looked and nodded. He said, "Knowing when to stop is also part of not being in a hurry." Nam smiled, for the first time, felt he had grown a little. By the end of the month, Mrs. Han brought a small basket of pastries, thanking him for the evenings of fixing watches for students. She told how the kids went home and watched the second hand go tick-tick, like witnessing a little miracle. He said the miracle is not in the hand, but in the eyes that know how to stop. She laughed and said, leaving felt like hearing a bell. That day, it rained a long, heavy rain of mid-autumn. He closed early brewed tea. Nam sat and sorted screws by size, feeling a strangely peaceful heart. He asked him, what if the shop had no more customers in the future? He poured more tea and replied, as long as there are people who need a slow rhythm, someone will come here. And if no one needs it, we still sit and keep time for ourselves. Time hates no one. We only need not hate time. Late at night, the rain eased. He turned off the light, locked the door. Nam said his goodbyes and dashed home through the rain. He stood a few seconds in the dark, listened to the ticking of the wall clock slipping through the crack in the door, tiny yet warm. He knew tomorrow will still begin with the sound of a street vendor's cart and a distant cry. He also knew somewhere in this city there will be someone needing a place to sit and breathe slowly. And when they push open the door and step in, the yellow glow above the workbench is ready. The story does not end on a particular morning. It continues each time someone places a watch on the table and places their trembling hand too. It continues each time someone learns to breathe evenly before tightening a small screw. It continues each time we stop demanding time to be different and quietly go with time as it is. Then the tick-tick is no longer urging. It is the sound of our heart returning steady and gentle in an unhurried morning. The story. The second-hand bookstore owner and the smell of sunshine on the pages. One morning, the city opened its eyes to the sound of the street sweeper's broom brushing lightly across the pavement, still holding traces of last night's rain. The little alley leading into Mrs. Hoa's second-hand bookstore was like a thread stitching together two rows of houses, quiet and pleasantly cool. The wooden sign above was faded, but the letters remained clear. Inside, the scent of old paper mixed with the pine wood shelves aged long ago, and an occasional hint of freshly poured tea. Mrs. Hoa was over 60, her hair silver, tied neatly, her eyes kind but alert, her hands slow but sure. Each morning, she pushed open the door, welcomed the first sunlight of the day by opening both shutters wide, and placed 3 stacks of books on the windowsill so the sun could dry them. She said that sunshine dried the books and warmed the hearts, and the 2 tasks supported each other very well. On that day, a young man named Fuch dropped in. He later admitted he had walked past the bookstore many times, but had not dared to enter because he thought the place was only for people who were idle and unhurried. That morning, Fuch stood for quite a while in front of the cover of a cloth-bound notebook, then looked up and greeted her. Mrs. Hoa invited him to sit, poured a cup of green tea, and asked if he was looking for anything. Fuch shook his head, said he just wanted to sit for a little while. She nodded, placed a small cloth on the table, and set out a plate of sesame cookies. In a few minutes of silence, Fuch heard sounds that were hard to hear on the street outside the soft turning of pages, like someone whispering the sunshine falling on the edge of a cover, like wind brushing a leaf. Mrs. Hoa had the habit of arranging books not by author or genre, but by the reading rhythm she imagined for each visitor. The far corner held the thick and solemn volumes nearer the front were the thin and light ones. She believed that a person who had just stepped in needed a staircase rather than a wall. Fuch skimmed the shelves and stopped at a small volume, its pages honey-toned with age. He picked it up and noticed on the first page someone's faint pencil line that read, "Read slowly with your eyes, and even more slowly with your heart." Fuch smiled softly. He had never met such a simple instruction. At midday, the sun rose and the alley suddenly shone like a strip of water shimmering. A 6th grade girl rushed in like a gust of wind placed on the table. Some comic books with worn spines, and said she wanted to exchange them for another volume. Mrs. Hoa inspected them gently, asked how things were at school lately. The girl spoke slowly. Her new teacher had become kind. The classmate next to her teased less. Her mother still sold goods in front of the market, and her father had promised to take her to the park this weekend. After hearing this, Mrs. Hoa did not lecture. She just gave her a stiff cardboard for a bookmark. The girl nodded and thanked her, ran off, and managed to turn back and say that the smell of books here was like the smell of sunshine after rain. Mrs. Hoa smiled and said that was the smell of patience. In the early afternoon, Fuch spoke up. He said he had just quit his job, his heart floating, and he had difficulty sleeping. He picked up odd jobs to forget the feeling of being left behind, but only grew more tired. Sitting here a while, he felt as though someone laid a wampum towel across his forehead. Mrs. Hoa did not scold or teach him. She just told a story from her youth. She once worked at a printing house. In busy seasons, the machines ran continuously, paper moving like waves. She told of one time the machine jammed. Everyone panicked, but one old technician stood still, then shut the machine off, wiped a thin layer of dust from a shaft, and smiled, saying, "One only needs to lose one beat." From then on, she memorized the lesson. Losing one beat is gaining a path. A middle-aged man carrying a box of old books entered after a short shower of rain. He said he was clearing house and wanted to gift them. Mrs. Hoa invited him to sit, poured tea. The two opened the box. Inside were volumes with broken corners, many with slips of paper marking pages. She gently shook each book. Sunlight slanted in and embraced the fine dust. The man said, with a half-spoken sentence, that his mother had died. Last year, her books were the part he had not dared touch. Mrs. Hoa closed the box and said that some things are quieter than any words, and people need time to touch them again without pain. She told him to keep a few books. Choose those titles that make him remember his mother smiling. He selected 4 volumes, hugged them to his chest, his eyes misty but more peaceful. Late afternoon, the alley was dyed the color of tea. Phuc moved from the small table to help Mrs. Hoa wipe the shelves. Light work, but it made him feel diligent. Each time he handed her a cloth, she reminded him to breathe once, then wipe. At first, Phuc thought it odd, but after a few turns, he realized that if you hurry, the dust flits up, but if you breathe, then wipe, the dust settles and drifts away with the weave of the cloth. He could not help but exclaim that dust understands the language of rhythm. Mrs. Hoa nodded. Everything understands the language of rhythm. We just need to speak less and know how to listen. A university student entered awkwardly, his raincoat still wet, holding a bound copy of his thesis. He asked for a woodworking book that existed only as a faded photocopy. Mrs. Hoa searched for a long time and then handed him a slim volume like a leaf. The student worried that the slim book would not be enough. She said sometimes, what we need is one right sentence, not a pile of words. He sat on the floor, read avidly, occasionally looked up, squinting, as though afraid of losing a thought that had just passed. Before leaving, he asked for a blank sheet of paper. She handed him one and told him to write 3 things he wished to keep when doing his craft. He bent over for a while, then folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket, holding it tightly as though safeguarding a seed that had just been watered. Dusk came with a ribbon of ripe pomegranate color at the end of the alley. The air smelled of orange peel and damp moss. A woman paused on the windowsill, not entering, saying nothing. Mrs. Hoa went out and stood beside her, both looking at the yellow cat lying on the corrugated roof across the way. The woman said her older sister used to take her to the bookstore every Saturday afternoon. Later, when she grew up, she dropped the habit, replacing it with evenings curled up in her phone. She thought her memory would serve her unconditionally until one morning she forgot her mother's laughter. Mrs. Hoa did not comfort or scold her. She just asked if she wanted to come inside. Let the smell of paper help record it. The woman nodded, stepped in, chose a seat by the window. While Mrs. Hoa poured tea, the woman said softly, "I feel like I'm opening a door with no hinges." The sunset arrived. The mid-afternoon turned into evening. The story does not end on a particular morning. It continues whenever someone places a book on the table and places their restless hand too. It continues whenever someone learns to breathe steadily before turning a page. It continues whenever we stop demanding time to be different and quietly move with time as it is. Then the rustle of pages is no longer urging. It is the sound of our heart returning steady and kind in an unhurried morning. Night has fallen and customers have thinned out. She closed one of the doors slightly, but not completely, so the alley could still hear the rustle of paper. She told Phuc to place the books that had just been read onto the front shelf so that tomorrow morning the sunlight would touch them first. Phuc asked why. She replied, because books are like people. When they return from a journey, they should stand near the door for a while to breathe. Phuc smiled, and in that smile, he carried a weight set down softly. Phuc asked for permission to tell his story. He said he used to run endlessly from one goal to another, and whenever he reached a finish line, he would find it had moved farther away. He once thought if he could not push into the front row, he would vanish. But today, sitting here, he discovered there was another way to be present that did not require fighting for a spot. She listened, then pointed at the wooden chair by the door. The chair had darkened after decades of people sitting. She said the chair has been here for many years, unmoved, but every person who sat on it brought a different life to it. The chair is not the goal. The chair is the place where we breathe to know we still have a way to go. Near midnight, the soft rain returned. She gathered 5 or 6 books and placed them on the sill by the door so the rain would touch each spine. For a moment, then withdraw as if two people greeting with a short hand touch. Phuc was stunned and asked what if they got wet. She smiled and said, "Sometimes books should smell of rain too. So when someone opens them, they recognize that alongside the words, there is weather walking with them." She said, as long as one knows when to pull back, getting a little wet is no problem, like a small sadness that helps us remember we have a heart. Phuc stayed overnight in the loft where a few boxes of unsorted books were placed. He awoke at dawn to the gentle sound of an old teapot clicking on the electric stove. She was boiling water. He went downstairs, saw the steam misting the glass door. She pointed at the 2 stacks of books on the windowsill and told him to take them outside to dry in the sun. Phuc carried each stack, felt the weight just right in his hands. He placed them down and looked at each page open as though an eyelid just awakened. The first sunlight was as gentle as a hair being brushed. The smell of paper warmed slowly, unhurried. Through the week, Phuc stayed and helped her. He glued torn book spines, dried damp pages, packed a few orders. Each task had its own breathing rhythm, and he learned to seek that rhythm before reaching his hand. He realized his old habit was to push in to finish fast to do more. But here finished did not mean done for good. Finished meant right. He began to recognize the fine line between hurrying and truly living. One day, an older gentleman in a crisp, old vest walked in, holding a brown hat in his hand. He sought a missing volume of poetry he had long lost. She searched until midday and found it the cover shredded, but the interior intact. He sat down, opened it, read silently. His face changed, like the sky rolling past a bright cloud. He closed the book, smiled, and said thanks in a voice as soft as a breath. She refused his money, only asked for one line of the poem he remembered most. He recited slowly, "Do not force the day to pass faster than your shadow." The entire bookstore fell silent like a small ceremony. Phuc looked and saw in her eyes a thin ray of sunlight. On a weekend afternoon, she asked Phuc to write his name on a piece of cardboard and place it on a newly arranged shelf. He was surprised. She said so that visitors know there is one more hand caring for the books. Phuc felt his heart warm, like touching a sun-warmed stone. He wrote his name, placed the cardboard into the wooden slot, heard the card touch the shelf like the sound of a promise newly made. On the day they parted, the sky was clear. Phuc stood at the threshold, hesitating. He feared he would be swept away again on the street. She handed him a canvas-bound notebook in indigo and told him to write 3 lines every morning. Line 1, the smell of the day. Line 2, the smallest sound heard. Line 3, what you wish to set down. She said when those 3 lines appear, the day has slowed enough for you to see yourself. Fuchs accepted the notebook, placed his hand on it, as if greeting a friend. She led him to the door, offered no lengthy advice, only said, if one morning the words run too fast, stop at a bookstore, smell the books, then resume writing. Fuchs stepped onto the street and found the city no longer frightening. He heard the familiar calls of vendors, the burst of laughter from a refreshment stall, the tram passing at the end of the alley. The sounds were old, but had an added depth, like turning another page you thought had nothing behind. He opened the notebook right on the sidewalk. The smell of the day was the smell of sunshine after rain. The smallest sound was the whisper of paper when the first page opens. What he wished to set down was the habit of demanding immediate goals. After writing, he folded the notebook, his head light, as if he had crossed a bridge without realizing it. Months passed, and Fuchs returned occasionally. Each time he came, he did not need to say much. She did not ask if he had succeeded. The two looked at each other with the eyes of people who know rhythm. He shared small stories of joy and sorrow from his new job. From those early mornings, he stood by the window, writing 3 lines, and then grabbed his backpack and left. He said there were days he was swept away, but at night he opened the notebook, read the smell of the morning, and what was moving fast suddenly slowed down. She told of a few more visitors, a few books finally finding the right person. They laughed, and the bookstore seemed to expand without moving a wall. One day, she quietly said it was time to close the shop for a while to repair the roof. She handed Fuchs a bunch of spare keys and said, if anyone needs a place to sit quietly, just open the door, pour the tea, and let the sun do its part. Fuchs accepted them, his heart filled with nameless gratitude. He looked around and saw everything in its place, as if it had always been there, waiting for someone to arrive and waiting for someone to go. The story does not end with the roll of the shutter. It continues every morning. Someone lays a hand on a page and smells the sunshine rising slowly. It continues every noon. Someone stops in the street, looks through a window full of books, and sees inside themselves also a wooden shelf and quiet stacks of paper. It continues every evening. Someone writes 3 lines, accepting that slow is not losing, but a way to recognize the road beneath your feet. And then the smell of old books is no longer a memory. That smell becomes the present. The second-hand bookseller may rest, but the smell of sunshine on the pages remains like a wooden chair that knows how to hold a place for breath. The story, the ferryman, between misted waters. Early in the morning, in the riverside town, the day began with the sound of water lightly lapping the shore, as if someone were tapping a teacup gently to wake the fragrance of the tea. A thin mist draped the surface of the river, like a veil covering the rock outcrops, the wooden bridge, the brown-roofed houses packed together on the grassy bank. The river was not wide, but wide enough to split the rhythm of life on one side, the market on the other, the landing, and orchards stretching long. Each day, people still waited for the little ferry to cross, and the ferryman's name was Bin. He lived in a wooden house right by the water's edge. The window always open. A wind chime made of seashells hung there, and when it rang, it sounded like distant rain. He did not talk much. When he took the oar, his back was straight, but relaxed. His hands moved evenly, his breathing deep. From his youth until his hair turned gray, he worked that landing with the same small boat, greeting the mist in his eyes when he woke and closing them when the moon rose. One early autumn morning, a young man named Koi arrived at the landing. Koi had just left the city, his eyes still carrying the flicker of neon lights and the sound of horns. He carried a backpack, stood by the river, looking at the mist, as though at a door he did not know how to open. Bin rode up near the bank, smiling, with his eyes, invited him aboard. Koi hesitated, then stepped onto the wooden plank. The boat nudged the water and slid through the mist. Suddenly, he felt his shoulder relax. The noise in his head fell back like a train receding. He asked how long it usually took to cross. Bin answered not long, but do not ask how long the river takes to travel. Koi tilted his head puzzled and remained silent. On that ride were also an elderly woman carrying a basket of vegetables, a young girl clutching a bundle of books, and a man with a long wooden box. The man opened the box. Inside was a bamboo flute. He played a very short tune, as if testing his breath. The flute's voice rose through the mist, round and warm. The old woman said the flute made the vegetables fresher. The girl said the flute made the letters behave better. Koi listened, thought the words odd, yet felt his heart soften. Bin did not speak. He just let the oar part the water, let the flute's voice accompany the boat, let the mist fold open, like the eyelid of someone gently dreaming. Mid-river, Small ripples formed. Bin paused the oar for a moment, looked at the bow. He said there was an undercurrent. Koi, worried, asked if it was dangerous. Bin said no, just needed to change rhythm a little. He turned the oar, angled the bow aside, allowed the undercurrent to pass like a story that needs no reply. The boat swayed slightly and then settled. Koi realized that small shift wasn't to conquer the river, but to let the river go its proper way. He looked at Bin and asked how he knew when to change rhythm. Bin replied, "I know when I am not in a hurry." The answer was as short as a raindrop, landing right on a fresh leaf, making Koi want to say more, then stopped. The far bank appeared nearer. The old woman descended, paying with a handful of glossy greens. The girl bowed, hugged her books, and ran toward the school, still resonant with late cicada songs. The flautist stood for a moment. He asked Bin if he would like to hear a longer piece. Bin nodded. He stood at the front of the boat and played a nameless score. The flute began with a bass note, then, as though pulled upward by an invisible thread, to a bright place. But before it became dazzling, it dropped back, laid still on the water's surface, like a lazy blade of grass. Each phrase felt like a full breath. Koi asked the name of the piece. The man replied, "No name needed, just know how to go from in to out without breaking the line." That day, Koi rented a small room near the riverside. He told the guest house owner he needed a few weeks to write a long piece, though in his heart he didn't yet know whether the words would find a resting place. At noon, Koi went to the landing, leaned against a wooden post, watched the river flow. Some old leaves fell from branches, spun like tiny boats, brushed the boat's flank, then drifted away. He dropped a pebble into the water and heard a tiny plop. The circle spread out, struck the bank, thinned, then faded. He realized that everything he wanted to write should perhaps be like that. Writing not to make noise, but to create a circle just enough to touch a shore, and then stop. In the afternoon, Koi went to the boat again. This time, a young woman arrived with a rolled-up painting. Her name was Le. She painted banks and river curves in the mist. She showed the painting to Bin. On the paper was a scene with no figures, only drifting streaks of light. Bin said there was a person in it. Le jumped, asked where. Bin pointed at the blank space between two streaks of light. There was a place for someone to stand. Le smiled and said maybe she had, until now, only painted what appears forgetting to leave a place for the viewer to step in. Koi heard that it sounded like a key turning quietly. He thought of the passages he used to write, so packed with words, there was no place to breathe. Night fell. Lamps from the market shore cast broken golden streaks over the water. A distant wind touched his shoulder like a light tap. Normally, by this time, Bin had tied the boat to the post, sat on the wooden step, and listened to the river converse with the stones. He had a small clay teapot and brewed very weak tea, fragrant like newly unfurled leaves. He poured tea for anyone who happened to show up at the landing late. That evening, Koi stayed. He asked if Bin had ever gone far away. Bin said yes, but the river called. Koi asked what the river calls with. Bin replied with a silence. Koi stayed quiet, listened to that silence between them like a bridge without handrails. The next morning, the sky was different. The mist was thicker than ever. Far away, he could only see a soft, white patch. Bin still paddled. He tapped the oar lightly on the boat's side, setting a rhythm as though telling the boat where it was. Koi asked, "What if you cannot see the bank?" Bin said at that moment, "Listen to the bank." Koi laughed, thinking it a metaphor. But then he really listened. Somewhere there was a rooster crow, the sound of a door latch opening, the gentle cough of someone in the chill mist. These small sounds laid the path for the boat. Bin said people are like that too. When you cannot see the road, listen to the small things. We set our foot on them like stepping onto pebbles on the riverbed. In his days at the landing, Koi met many people. A schoolgirl brought an old music box and said the spring was tired, so the melody stopped halfway. Bin did not fix the box. He told her to open the lid press, the side of her arm to it. Listen to the silence. The girl laughed and said, "How can you listen to silence?" Bin said, "Silence also has height and length." The girl closed her eyes. After a while, she opened them and said it seemed the silence was also a musical note. Bin nodded and said, "Remembering that is enough." On another day, an elderly farmer carrying a bundle of young rice seedlings came, said the irrigation water in the fields was short. Bin listened quietly, made no promise, gave no instructions. He simply ferried the man across the river with one deep stroke of the oar, so that the farmer's shoulders shook less. That less shaking often matters more than a word of encouragement. Koi wrote steadily. He no longer sat all day before a blank sheet chasing words. He scheduled his work. Morning. He wrote a passage from flow afternoon, one from mist evening, one from silence. He did that for a week, and then reread. The sentences no longer raced. They sat alongside each other, like boat passengers sharing a ferry, not pushing to the bow or fighting for place. He gave what he had written to Le. She read it, smiled, and said, now Koi's writing had a place for someone to stand. She handed back a painting of the landing in mist and said she had left an empty space, just as Bin suggested. They looked at each other, feeling as though they had just studied a lesson from the river. One midday, there was a sudden rainstorm from upstream. The water rose quickly. The river's surface darkened. People rushed on the bank, calling each other, hauling boats up. Bin was calm. He untied the boat, rowed it diagonally away from the torrent, and tied it to a kajaput tree on the high bank. He told Koi that when the river rises, do not look for a straight route. The heavy raindrops on the boat side sounded like fingers tapping a table. Once safe, the people on shore exhaled, patted each other with short words. Bin sat down, poured tea, offered everyone at the landing a cup. The tea was thin, but warm, like the light touch of a hand placed in the right spot. After the rain, as the water receded, the river landing revealed new streaks of mud. On the mud were bird footprints. Koi bent down to look, saw the direction of their flight through the small marks like hastily written letters that nevertheless carried full meaning. He asked Bin whether he could read the bird marks. Bin said no, but he knew when they were afraid, when they were calm. Hoi asked how he knew. Bin replied, look at the stopping marks. If many stops, it means the flock stayed a while to feed, to preen, to converse. If the marks are only slanted lines, it means they passed through hearts, racing. Hoi noted that down thinking about the stopping marks in his own life. He realized he had lacked stops for far too long. One day, the flautist returned. He said he was about to go far away and wanted to play a farewell piece for the landing. Bin nodded, tied the boat to the bank, invited everyone aboard. Market people came over, orchard folk too. The entire landing became an open auditorium. He lifted his flute and played a piece longer than any before. The musical phrases joined like the river's waves, rising and falling. Some passages laid bare the light. Others retreated into shade. Mid-piece, he paused a very long beat, long enough that listeners thought the piece was finished. Then he played the final note, gentle as a hand touch. Everyone was still. For a moment, then clapped. Bin said the flautist had given the landing a gift. That gift was a stopping beat. Koi knew he was about to leave the landing. He came to greet Bin on a morning scented with wet leaves. He said thanks to the landing and the boat he had written the opening section of his long piece, the part he had long feared to begin. Bin did not ask whom that piece was about, or what it was about. He simply poured more tea and said each word also needs a ferry to bring it across. When we hurry, we push the word, rowing the water. When we slow down, the word finds its place on the gunwale and allows itself to get wet before drying. Koi nodded, feeling that sentence as though it tethered him to this landing. That afternoon, his last one there, Koi asked to row. Bin stood behind, placed a hand on his shoulder, and said, "Do not try to push hard, just steady." Koi held the oar, his leading hand slightly awkward. Water splashed onto his cool forearm. He searched for his rhythm by looking at the grassy bank, at a single leaf, at a post standing still. When the boat moved straight, Bin removed his hand from Koi's shoulder. Koi realized that gesture was both trust and a reminder. He rowed to mid-river, stopped, looked around. The mist was no longer thick. The afternoon light draped a honey-colored cloth over the water. He exhaled not from fatigue, but because he knew he would miss this rhythm. The night before his departure, Koi sat alone on the landing. Bin was inside the house, the sound of cups clinking on a wooden tray, the teapot boiling, the door sliding shut. Small sounds, but in that hush, they sounded like a melody. Koi opened his notebook, wrote 3 lines. The smell of the day was the smell of mist touching the boat's hull. The smallest sound was the oar landing before the pull. What he wished to set down was the habit of asking how long it takes for every river to cross. He closed the notebook, leaned back against a post, closed his eyes. He heard the water whispering like a long storyteller. Each word, a drop, each sentence, a ripple not hurried, not slow, just right. Next morning, when he was leaving the landing, had more people. The old woman with her greens, the girl with her books. The flautist was absent, but one seemed to hear his flute beneath the murmur of voices. Le carried a newly finished painting, the boat landing in mist, with a blank space in the composition just big enough for someone to stand in. She handed it to Koi and told him to take it to remember the landing. He hesitated to refuse, but the look in Le's eyes was kind and steady, and he accepted. Bin tied the final line, signaled others to board. He rowed very slowly, as though extending a short journey. Koi stood at the bow, listened, said nothing. When they reached the bank, Koi jumped ashore, turned, bowed. Bin simply smiled and nodded. He spoke a soft line, like a breath. Whenever you return, the landing will still be here, the river still flowing, the mist still fine. Only the ore will have grown a little older. Koi replied, "Whenever my words grow tired, I will seek the landing to sit." Bin did not answer. He turned the boat around and carried the others back to the opposite shore. The oar cut the water. A circle blossomed, then faded, like stories that pass and leave the scent of mist lingering. Koi walked along the street, found the town no longer as he first saw it. Not because it had changed, but because inside him there now was a small river, a boat, a silent ferryman. He boarded the coach, sat by the window. As the vehicle rolled away, he saw the river fade behind a layer of road dust, but the sound of water did not die. He knew the long piece he would write would begin with one very slow line. That line would be the oar entering the water before the pull. Time passed. Seasons changed. On rainy afternoons, in his new room, in another city, Koi opened Lee's painting and placed it on his desk. He brewed tea, poured a thin cup. He heard the kettle bubbling like rain hitting leaves. He wrote, then erased, then wrote. Whenever his hand stiffened, he closed his eyes, imagined a boat in mist, a ferryman placing his hand on his shoulder, saying steady. He opened his eyes, bent down, and the words flowed out straight, without stumbling. A year later, Koi returned to the landing. The mist was still thin, the water still calm. The seashell wind chime at Bin's door still rang like distant rain. Bin older, but his eyes brighter. He still ferried, still poured tea, still spoke very little. Koi handed him his newly printed slim book. On its first page, he had written a dedication to the one who taught me to listen to the bank when I cannot see the bank. Bin read it, smiled, neither praised nor criticized. He placed the book on the shelf above the door, right under the wind chime. There the breeze passes to turn gently the first pages. Another young girl, not the one from before, stepped in and asked, "Is there something to learn at the river landing?" Bin looked at her and said, "Yes, learn how to wait for the ferry without impatience. Learn how to step on the boat without making it tip. Learn how to hold silence when the bank is still far. Learn how to stop in mid-river to hear the bank." The girl laughed and said it sounded too hard. Bin shook his head and said, "No, not hard, just long." Koi stood beside, suddenly felt his eyes water. He understood there are lessons without graduation because they stretch out through a lifetime. That evening, Lee brought a new painting. It showed the landing in a cold wind season, water higher, sky lower, but in the painting still, there was the blank space just big enough for someone to stand hand on chest to find their rhythm. She placed the painting on the wood step and said the landing should keep this piece. Bin nodded, hung the painting beside the clay teapot. He said, when the mist is thick, the one waiting can look at that blank space and find they are not lost. Le said the painting had no name. Bin said, that was good, because the one who stands there will name it with their breath. Night came quickly. The river landing lit up. The water lapping the boat's side became a steady rhythm. Hoy sat on the wood step, said nothing because none was needed. Bin poured tea. Le sat by him, rested her chin on her knees, eyes on the river, but looking somewhere further. The three were silent, each holding one end of the story, letting it pass through their hands without tying it down. High above, a star emerged behind the clouds. Below, a fish breached, leaving a circle that faded into the water's shadow. Everything ordinary to the point of rarity. The story of the river landing, the boat, the silent ferryman, has no ending. Each morning, when the mist settles down, it begins again. Whenever someone steps onto the boat, the story takes one beat. Whenever someone steps ashore, the story stops one beat. Those beats, if gathered, become a long piece of music, as long as a human life. No need for a name, no need for complex notes, only the right silences in the right places. And when we go far, if ever there is a day when we cannot see the bank, we just close our eyes a little, listen to the small things, and then place the oar in the water. The river will carry us home. The landing is still there. The mist is still fine. The sound of water still gentle. And the ferryman, though his hair is whiter, still places his hand on your shoulder with a silent touch and says, steady. The story. The man who grows flowers on the windy slope. Morning in the windy hills began with a very thin sound, like someone's coat brushing across a branch of leaves. The sun had not yet risen. Only the silvery light of mist reflected off the droplets still clinging to the blade of grass. In the middle of the valley, a man in his 50s was bending among the flower beds. His name was Lamb. People in the area called him the wind flower grower because no one's garden looked like his. There were not just daisies, sunflowers, or roses there, but also unnamed flower species growing in response to the wind's rhythm and the sun's direction. Some days, the wind arrived early, and the flowers leaned hard to one side, as if bowing. Some days, the wind was late, and the flowers stood upright, as though listening. And Lam the gardener never tried to bend anything. He said the wind teaches the flowers how to live. He only learned how to stand still. Each morning, Lam rose before full daylight. He brewed a pot of tea, poured into a small cup, set it on a stone step. The steam rose gently and mixed with the mist into a wisp of smoke. He sat and watched the ground change color, heard the birds begin to call each other. On the table lay a small notebook, its cover worn and slightly frayed. Inside, he did not record watering schedules or fertilizer amounts, but the stories of each flower bush. On the first page, he wrote, Day 1, the flower opened a petal. Day 2, the flower was still. Day 3, the flower looked at the sky. Some visitors asked why he wrote things that did not help productivity. He smiled and said the entries were not meant for measuring, but for remembering that the flower has its own rhythm, like a person. One early winter morning, a young woman arrived. Her name was Mai. She had just left the city with a gray canvas backpack on her shoulder, her eyes looking tired. She had heard a rumor that on this hillside garden there was a flower bed that bloomed only by the breath of the sky, and she wanted to see it for herself. Lam was cutting dry flower stems when he heard light footsteps on the gravel. He looked up and saw the young woman standing quietly, hands gripping the backpack strap, saying nothing. He only smiled and gestured toward the nearest bed of flowers. Mai bent down and gently touched a pale yellow petal, so soft she feared she might break it. He told her it was a wild-grown variety, seedless, born of wind only. She asked how. He answered by patience. The wind brings the seed, the soil keeps it, the rain awakens it, and the gardener simply waits. They sat under the tree drinking tea. Mai told him she had worked in an office facing a screen and numbers every day. One day, she realized she had forgotten the real color of the sky, so she quit and sought a place of quiet. Lam asked what silence was for. She did not know, only said maybe to hear whether she was still breathing. He smiled and said perhaps she would find the answer among the flowers. He stood and went to the back of the garden, where a patch of small white flowers like foam grew. He told her that every day he spoke one sentence to that patch, and they grew with each breath. Mai asked what he said. He replied simply, "Thank you." By midday, the sun spread across the hill. Layers of breeze passed by, bringing the scent of newly opened flowers, light and clear, like the smell of water after rain. Mai asked to stay a few days to learn how to care for flowers. Lam agreed. He gave her an old watering can and showed her how to pour from a distance so the soil would not erode. She fumbled and water splashed on her shoes. Dirt spattered her clothes. Lamb did not scold. He only told her that if she wanted the flowers to understand, she must not water as if it were a chore. She should water as if she were calling a dear person's name. Mai laughed. She said she had never thought watering plants could be a way of speaking. He answered, "Every action is a word only different in how it is heard." In the afternoon, they sat on a stone step and watched the sun descend. The amber-mingled orange light flooded the valley. The wind changed direction, making the flower petals lean like an orchestra bowing. Lam asked Mai if she saw anything different between morning and evening. She replied the flowers were the same, only the light changed. He said, "Actually, the flowers changed too. It's just that we cannot see because we are looking with our eyes. When the wind blows, the flowers listen with their bodies, and people only hear with their ears." She was silent a moment, then asked, "So what do you hear with?" He answered with silence. That evening, they had dinner in a small wooden house. On the table was an oil lamp, its flame flickering with the breeze from the porch. Mai looked around and saw nothing superfluous. A few teacups, a notebook, a small stack of wood, and a faded photograph on the wall. In the photo was a woman smiling in the flower garden. Mai asked if she was his wife. Lam nodded. He told her she died 10 years ago, but whenever the wind blows, he still hears her call his name among the beds of flowers. He said he is not in pain, only remembering. He said memory is also a kind of flower, only it blossoms in the heart. She listened, her throat tight, but she did not feel sad. She felt the sentence was like a light in the mist. Next morning, Mai woke early. She went out to the garden and found Lam standing watching the sun just begin. He told her today was the day the sunflowers bloom. They walked to the edge of the hill. A whole field of bright yellow flowers opened before their eyes. The blossoms turned toward the same direction. Mai felt she was standing among thousands of little suns. She asked why he did not pick and sell them. He laughed and said these flowers were not for sale. They were born to teach people how to look up. She looked at him and saw his eyes shining like sunshine. In that instant, she understood why people called him the windflower grower. He did not grow flowers to live, but lived to grow. In the days that followed, Mai learned how to prune stems, how to observe leaves. Lam did not instruct directly. He only told her to stay longer with the flowers. She sat for hours and wrote in her notebook the very small changes. One afternoon, she noticed a bloom closing its petals earlier than the others. She asked why. He said perhaps it was tired or the wind had not arrived. Mai laughed and said that sounded like a person. He replied, because people too are part of the garden. She wrote that sentence in her notebook, felt her heart lighten, as though someone had undone a knot around her chest. One day, there was heavy rain. The wind lashed the door water, overflowed the roof eaves. Lam did not go to the garden. He sat by the window, watching the white torrent, sipping tea. Mai worried and asked if the flowers would die. He shook his head. He said there are storms that are necessary. Rain makes flowers, bow the soil soften, and people wait. She was silent, heard the rain like a music without rhythm. By night, the rain dropped off. They went outside. The flowers were bent, muddy petals. Mai felt pity, moved to wipe them. Lam restrained her and said to wait until morning. He said, night is when flowers rest. Wiping now would wake them from their sleep. She looked and saw the petals trembling under the pale moonlight as though breathing. Next morning, new sunlight flooded. The flowers were dry petals, open again. Mai was amazed. Lam only smiled and told her she had just seen what he always said: patience is the light after rain. They walked along the hill slope together. She heard water drip from leaves to the soil, each droplet like a greeting. In a corner of the garden was a new bed of flowers he had planted. Lam told her she would care for it. He put his hand on her shoulder and said, each person has their own bed. She asked how long before it blooms. He answered, when your heart is still enough. Time passed. Mai stayed longer than she had planned. She no longer counted days. Each morning, she watered. Each afternoon, she sat reading old books. One day, she opened Lam's notebook. On the last page, he had written, if one day I leave, may the wind tell the flowers that I once heard them sing. She closed the book, felt her eyes sting. That evening, Lam did not join her for dinner. He sat on the porch, looking at the stars. She came out and asked. He said he was waiting for the wind. She didn't understand. But late at night, when the wind rose, she heard the wind chime, ring. Long its sound, strange, both as a call and a farewell. Next morning, he did not rise early anymore. He lay in the wooden house, face untroubled, as one who has just entered a dream. Villagers came all silent. They said he had gone off with the wind. Mai stood beside them, did not cry. She just pointed out to the garden, looked at the flowers leaning to the morning breeze. She heard as though someone whispered thanks. A week later, she continued her work. She opened the notebook again and wrote her first line. Today the wind taught me how to bow. Each day, she added another line, not to record, but to keep rhythm. She began to brew tea in the morning, set the cup on a stone step, watched the steam rise, and quietly said thank you. Many years later, people still speak of that windflower garden. They say that whenever rain is coming, the flowers there lean over earlier than in other places, as if they know ahead. Some believe the wind warns them. Some believe the grower's spirit remains. But Mai knows that places' soil had grown used to hearing thank you. She did not open the garden to sell flowers, but so that anyone who comes could sit quietly for a bit, watch a bloom open, and realize life is as soft as that petal. One day, a boy from the city came. He told her his mother once told the story of the windflower grower. He wanted to learn how to grow flowers that know how to bow. Mai smiled, placed the watering can in his hand, said water, slowly, so the wind has time to pass through. He did so, water dropping in soft streams, light reflecting on the ground. She looked, saw in his eyes a light like the light once on Lamb's face. She quietly said, perhaps the wind has found a new one to teach how to stand still. That afternoon, the air was still. On the slope, the blossoms swayed gently. Mai sat on the stone step, watched the last sunlight spread across the garden. She opened the notebook and wrote another line. Today the wind blew across my heart, and I heard the flowers laughing. She looked up, saw a petal detach from a stem float, then land on the page. Its scent lingered soft and clear, like a greeting from someone who passed by, but still remains. The story did not end with a period, but with a breath, because the windflower grower did not really leave. He remains in the wind, in the petals, in the hands of those who learn to water slowly and say thank you. And each time someone passes by that hillside, if they stop, close their eyes, they will hear a very soft sound. The wind whispering through a blossom. Peace is not standing still, but moving with life's rhythm while keeping your own roots. The story, the net mender, on the tidal beach and the breath of the sea. Early morning in the fishing village began with the rhythm of the oar gently striking the water, and the salty smell soaking into skin like an unspoken greeting. The sun had not yet peeked over the low bank of clouds, yet the sand edge already welcomed new footprints. The small boats rolled from the night, their shadows tilting on the rippling water, like large fish just surfacing for air. At the edge of the beach, where the salt grass fringe met wet sand, a gray-haired man sat before a sun-speckled net. His name was Vian. Villagers called him the net mender, but those close said he was the one who kept the rhythm for the shore. For every patch he mended passed through his hands as slowly as a long exhale of a receding tide. Vian arrived at the beach very early. He brewed tea in a small clay kettle, polished by time, poured it into a dark glazed cup, placed it beside the folded net. The net lay ahead like a broken map. Each torn hole was a slit of story waiting to be heard. He never hurried. His left hand held a strand, his right threaded. The needle pulled loop after loop, tightened just enough. That just enough was the first lesson he learned from the sea. Pull too hard, the net shrinks. Loosen too much, the tear opens again. He said the sea dislikes haste. The sea only likes things that stand with the rhythm. That morning, a young woman stood at a distance, looking on. She pulled her hat to shade her face, held a camera, but did not raise it. Her name was Lynn. She had left the city for a while, seeking to rewrite her life at a different rhythm, because she had been living too long, like someone running a relay with herself. Lynn stepped forward, bowed, asked if she could sit nearby, and observe. Vian nodded his hands still in their old motion. He said, "Go ahead, but sit quietly. Don't let your breath drown the sea's voice." Lynn did not take pictures. She sat and listened to the waves sweeping through broken shells, sounding like teacups lightly struck. The wind swept her hair back. The smell of hot tea from his cup blended with the salt grass smell and the new sunlight smell to form a flavor hard to name. Vian asked where she came from. She said from a street that stayed lit even when people slept. He asked where she was going. She smiled and said she didn't know, but guessed she was heading toward a morning without hurry. Vian did not smile. He placed another cup of tea before her and said, "Drink first, then listen to the sea." Nearby, a boy dashed up, carrying a coil of old fishing line. His name was Hai Vian's grandson. His face sun-bronzed, his eyes glossy. He handed his grandfather a torn section of net and complained that last night he followed some older men to the far rocky point their line caught on coral, and this morning he found a hole the size of his hand. Vian accepted it and looked at the large tear for a while. He did not complain. He said, "A tear is part of the life of a net. If nothing tears, you will never see which loops need more tightening." Hai asked when it would be fixed. Vizian handed the needle to the boy and said, "Try." Hai threaded a stitch, it slipped. He tried another, too loose. He frowned. Vian chuckled softly and said, "Mending net is learning how to breathe. When you pant, your hand pulls hard. When your breath is steady, the patch knows where to lie." The old man and the boy leaned over the net. Lin watched a small repair, closing the mouth of the breach, and unconsciously saw something within herself being pulled together too. She whispered a thank you, faint and unclear, to whom? Perhaps to the long-time hand of the net mender, perhaps to the ceaseless coming and going of water, perhaps to the morning not yet broken by appointments. The sun rose higher. The tidal beach revealed new sand ripples. Sandpipers scuttled, leaving tiny footprints like the script of a trembling old hand. A few wooden boats came ashore. Calls and laughter mixed with the final engine sputters. A strong man arrived with a new net in his hand and asked Vian for help. He said last night he encountered a storm offshore. The boat pitched hard. The nets macked the hull and ripped 3 wide cuts. Vian shook his head lightly when he saw the old repairs were spaced too far apart. He said he could fix it, but next time leave a little space so the net can breathe. The man looked surprised and asked, "Nets breathe too?" Vian said, "Yes, they breathe through the slack between stitches. Without slack, the net is just heavy fabric, and the fish will see it and laugh." The man laughed heartily, apologized for not having thought of that simple thing. He sat down, watching the old man work. Lin watched too. With each stitch, each pull, Vian was still. He only paused when a wave slapped higher to listen if in that clamor there was a phrase worth remembering. Occasionally, he looked toward the horizon. That was his old habit. He said, "Look afar a bit to know where the needle is going. If you only look at the tear, you'll forget the shape of the net." Lin raised her camera, captured a close frame of the aged fingers on the wet nylon line gleaming under the sun. She suddenly felt her camera exhale relax. Vian asked her what she photographed for. She said to remember. He nodded. Remembering is a way of holding, but hold with your nose and ears too. The sea smell today differs from yesterday. The sound of the tide receding today is longer than the tides receding last week. These small differences are where time leaves footprints. If you only look with your eyes, you will miss those footprints. An old woman selling fish passed by and placed beside Vian a basket of freshly caught anchovies, glinting silver. She said, This is the net mender's share, for if he had not sewed this patch, the fish would have escaped. Vian refused, but she insisted. Take it. It gives me joy. He accepted, but gave the larger share to Hai. Hai looked at the fish excitedly. He handed some to Lin and said, "You take these to grill with hot rice." Lin smiled and heard her laughter, like a gentle pat, rarely heard lately. The noon passed slowly. The sunlight draped gold cloth on the beach. Vian paused. His stitch poured more tea. He told Lin about his youth, working on a boat outside the village, wanting to know what other shores looked like. He went for nearly a year, across 3 ports, learned how to tie rope, how to listen to wind, how not to fear the night. Then he returned because he realized every wave flows to one rhythm, and that rhythm is within oneself if one chooses to listen. Lin asked if he regretted. He said, "Regret is a small boat. You put it into the water when needed, then pull it ashore when done. Don't tie it to your ankle and walk across the wet sand." The wind rose. The water's surface blurred briefly, then cleared. Vian pointed to the new wave patterns and told Hai, "That's a sign it will rain lightly this afternoon." Hai asked how he knew. He smiled and said by the smell. Lin held up her hand in the wind and felt nothing different. Vian said, "Perhaps you need to stay here a season to smell it. But anyway, no rush. There are many things in life you don't need to know straight away. Just know you still want to smell, want to listen, want to look." A small boat approached the shore. A young man aboard bowed deeply to Vian and asked to borrow his needle because his bow caught a rock and tore a section of net. Vian lent it with one requirement: return it before the tide rises. The man promised rowed off his oar, slicing across a strip of sunlight. The light shattered like a thin mirror. Lin watched and thought of the times she broke a day by demanding it shine more. She exhaled and realized that here no one turns the day up or down. People simply hold out their hand to receive just that amount of light that comes and goes. The afternoon crawled down. Purple clouds gathered above the hill. The young man returned the needle as promised and brought half a basket of flagged shellfish, saying they were a gift from his wife. Vian thanked him, distributed to the people nearby, kept only a small portion. He picked up one shell, held it to Lin's ear, and let her hear the faint water sound trapped in the hollow. Lin listened. Yes, there was a faint vibration. She asked, "Is that the Sia?" Vian said, "No, it is the memory of the shell." Anyone who ever held water will remember it by the sound of it in their own shell. People are the same. Each has a sound of their own to name the things they've passed. When you remember the right sound, you fear less. Before the rain returns, the tidal flat holds a strange stillness. The birds have stopped. The waves have ceased. People have paused. Only the thin wind brushes across the shoulders like someone's hand lightly reminding. Vian says this is the moment to sit. He lays out the small tarp, sets the net he has just mended to one side, and sits up straight. Lin and Hai sit beside him. No one speaks. The heartbeat of the sandbar echoes like the footsteps of a toddler learning to walk. Rain begins. The first drops land on the freshly stretched net, leaving transparent round beads. Hai reaches out with delight to catch them. Lin tilts her face upward toward the sky, letting a drop rest on her eyelid. Cool. Vian opens his eyes and says softly, "This is when the net rests." The rain passes quickly. On the surface of the sea, a ribbon of light breaks. The early market fishermen stop by to collect nets. They pay with their smiles, with a few dried fish, with words promising more work tomorrow. Vian takes the smile as payment above all. He ties one final knot, puts away the needle, wraps the net in the tarp, stands up. Hai hugs the coiled fishing line and runs ahead. Lin remains seated. She says, "Thank you for letting her sit with the same rhythm of the day." Vian asks if she heard anything yet. She says she heard the tear stitch itself back together with patience. He nods. He tells her that tomorrow, if she is still here, she should come a little earlier, before the fog lifts, to watch the net shake off its droplets like someone just waking up. Night falls, and the fishing village glows with warm yellow lights. Lin rents a small room near the dock, listening to the waves, as though the sound of someone's shirt hung out on a wooden pole. She opens her laptop, intending to write. It has been a long time since she wrote. Not because she had to meet a deadline or complete an assignment, but simply because she wanted to preserve the salt air of the day. She opens a blank page and writes one sentence. "This morning, I learned to mend a net with my breath." Then she stops, listens to the scent of tea still clinging to her clothes, hears the wind slipping through the crack in the door, and finds her eyes gently closing. The following day, Lin arrives very early, while the tidal flat is still dotted with the last late stars. Vian is already there. He does not ask, only hands her a different, smaller needle and says, Today you try a long stitch. Lynn trembles, but she remembers the words about breathing. She places the needle on the thread, passes it through, pulls back, pauses a moment, and then passes again. The wind brushes across her hair. The sun peeks out from behind the clouds. Each loop of thread touches the next like a polite handshake. When the long stitching is finished, Lynn lets out a very soft laugh. She looks at Vian. He says, "Good. Now go have a sip of water." The sea teaches people not to forget to drink water between tasks. That afternoon, another child comes. He cries because his little fishing net ripped when he flipped it into a shallow pool. Vian does not immediately mend it for him. He tells him to try doing it himself. The child wipes his tears, tilts his head, presses his lips together, and follows the motion. In just a moment, a clumsy stitch takes shape. Vian praises him just enough and gives him a small piece of net to practice on. Lynn suddenly understands that sometimes people only need to be given a needle and a gentle reminder about breathing that is enough to reconnect their own torn parts. In the late afternoon, Lynn asks Vian why he has never gone back out to sea. He answers, everyone has the place where they stand firm. Some stand on the water's surface, some on the tidal flat, some on the rocky promontory, some on the road between the village and the sea. I stand where the net comes onto shore. Here I hear the sound of what has gone and the sound of what is coming. Lynn nods, feeling that the answer needs no more words. On the day Lynn leaves the village, the tidal flat is slowly receding. Vian takes the initiative to give her a small piece of the mended net, telling her to keep it in her pocket, and whenever her heart tears, to take it out and remember how to pull just enough. He also gives her a small brown glazed teacup, telling her to use it for tea on windy mornings in the city. Lynn accepts, choked with words. She thanks him, promises to return when the noise inside her becomes too loud. Vian makes no promises. He only nods, as though he understands every rhythm of every shadow. On the bus leaving the village, Lynn opens her notebook. She writes 3 lines. The smell of the day is the smell of sun-dried salt on the fingers of the one who mends the net. The softest sound is the needle's point touching the wet thread. What I wanted to lay down is the habit of pulling hard to finish. Finished writing, she leans against the window glass, watching the sea fall behind. But the rhythm of the sea has sat down beside her. Seasons change. Winds vary. People pass by the tidal flat. But Vian still sits there every morning, greeting the day with a cup of tea and a new stitch. Hai grows older, knows how to thread the needle without cutting his hand. The fishermen come and go, leaving behind hellos, piles of fish stories, of storms and near. There are times when the sky is angry and the rain lashes the flat, but Vian still sits under the veranda, smoothing the threads of the net with his gaze. He knows each storm is a longer stillness than usual, after which the sea will sing in a new voice. He listens. He remembers. He keeps mending. One day, Lynn returns. She brings the brown glazed cup, which has chipped a small corner from a stumble while moving house. She asks him for a drop of glue to fix it. Vian laughs and says the chip is also a memory. Do not erase it. Just sand it smooth so it will not scratch your hand. She understands, places the cup on the sand, and listens to the water seeping into the chipped edge, sounding a gentle, low tone. She tells him about her new job, how she is practicing writing more slowly, how she has heard life too loudly, and now knows to return to mornings that are not rushed. He neither praises nor criticizes. He brews tea. The two sit together, watching the water change color. The story of the net mender on the tidal flat has no ending. Each new tear appears, and the story begins again, with a breath placed down a needle, threaded through a loop, pulled just enough, a hot cup of tea touched to the lips. The passers-by will carry a small piece of net in their pocket, a reminder that tear is not the end. A tear is an opportunity to learn one's rhythm. And when faced with a windy day, if one feels the hands wanting to pull hard, the person will pause. One beat, listen to the sea inside, whisper, pull just enough. And then everything will close like the surface of the water after a small stone falls in round and quieter than before. Story: the letter writer at the old post office. Early in the morning, on the riverside street, I often open my eyes to the sound of a bicycle clinking along the stone embankment, and the scent of freshly baked bread mixed with the warm steam rising from the river, which is still holding last night's heat. The old post office stood right on the corner of a three-way junction, its yellow plaster walls peeling its tiled roof, mottled with moss. The wooden door half open, like a welcoming hand. Inside, there was a long table made of limb wood, a worn rubber stamp, a small iron scale, a few rolls of twine, and many brown envelopes, neatly arranged. At the end of the table sat the hired letter writer. His name was Tone. His hair was half white, his eyes gentle and bright, his voice deep like old wood, creaking open and closed. His job was to listen to what people wanted to hold on to and turn those things into sentences that could travel far. Every morning, he opened the door a hair's beat earlier than the church bell. He wiped the tabletop, made a pot of light tea, set down 2 cups, one for himself and one for anyone who stepped in whose heart was still trembling. He laid out 3 fountain pens that had been with him many years. One pen was for apologies, round and warm. One was for thank yous, clear and light. One was for stories that had to be told slowly, so the ink could dry on the paper like a long exhalation, finding its rhythm. On the wall hung an old wooden clock, tilting a little. The hands moved slowly, but they did not fail. He said this clock followed the rhythm of the letters, not the rhythm of the traffic. One early autumn morning, a young woman walked in. She wore a coarse green dress, carried a small cross-body bag. Her hands fidgeted, touching the edge of an envelope. She introduced herself as Mai. She wanted to write to her father in the distant countryside a letter of apology for how she had, for several years, agreed to come home, but kept delaying. He nodded, poured the tea, pushed a sheet of blank paper closer, and told her to speak first. She spoke haltingly, one sentence, stumbling into the next. He did not interrupt. When she paused, he asked, when was the last time she and her father sat down together to eat? She hesitated, then said, one rainy afternoon. The fish stew was slightly salty. Her father told her not to turn off the stove so soon next time. He nodded and picked up the pen. He wrote slowly, each sentence short. He wrote about the smell of rain and the smell of the fish stew, about the spoon tapping against the pot, about how tomorrow she would open the stove a little earlier. When she read it back, she fell silent. She said she found out that apology could also have a taste. He smiled and said, apology is like a grain of salt placed in just the right spot. That noon, the sun came out clear and bright. A 6th grader boy wheeled in his bicycle, holding a small greeting card he had drawn himself in colored markers. His name was Bin. He asked him to help write nice lettering for his grandmother in another province. He asked what he wanted to say. He said he wanted to brag about his good grades. Promise he would come home for the Lunar New Year, tell about the cat in the alley, having just given birth to 3 kittens, and ask if his grandmother still walked to the market early in the morning. He handed him the lightest pen and told him, "You write it yourself. I will only guide the lines." Bien wrote, sweat beading on his forehead from nervousness. He placed his hand on his own, and he said, "Breathe steadily, then pull the stroke." When done, the boy smiled shyly. His handwriting still shook, but it felt warm. He and the man then stuck the stamp and dropped the envelope into the wooden mailbox. The boy looked at the box a moment longer, as though he could see the path of the loving message with his naked eyes. Late afternoon, a middle-aged man drew the door open with force. His face was tanned by the sun, his jacket coated in road dust. He asked to write a letter to his old friend, whom he had lost contact with. He said there were things that could not be said over the phone. Mr. Tone nodded, asked how many days until the letter should be delivered. The man said, "No hurry, just needs to arrive." He took out a sheet of paper thicker than usual and said, "Thick paper holds the touch of your hand." He told about his journeys, about stalled contracts, about one time he left a half-spoken apology hanging. He wrote like someone laying bricks to build a bridge, added one sentence, then paused to listen to the wind outside the door, to listen to the heart of the man sitting across him, shifting its pitch. When he read it back, the man gripped the edge of the table, his eyes wet, but his voice calm. He paid in small change and left a green tangerine on the table. The writer did not refuse. He said each letter needed a piece of fruit accompanying it so that the journey would not lose its flavor. One day, an old lady with white hair came very slowly, leaning on her cane. She wanted to write to a friend from the time of evacuation. She said maybe that friend was no longer alive, but she still wanted to send a greeting. He said, "Write anyway, because a letter does not only travel by postal route." She sat telling of the old path they used to walk together under the bamboo groves, the sound of the alarm drum, the smell of sweet potatoes, roasting in the clay kitchen, the conical hat being caught by the wind and blown away by the rice tree stump. He wrote all those details, not omitting a single word, because he knew this letter was not for expecting a reply. It was an incense stick, lit for memory. After sending it off, she sat a little longer, her hand stroking the tabletop, like stroking her old friend's hair. He stepped back, giving that quiet space time to finish its work. That little post office held many breaths like that. Every envelope that left his hand carried a thin fabric woven from slowness. Someone sent good news. He chose the bright ink pen. Someone sent a farewell. He chose the deep breath pen. Someone sent a question without words. Yet he chose the light stroke pen so the empty spaces would be just right. He stuck the stamp with a movement like tucking a blanket around a child already asleep. He stamped the date, but always told the sender that the date was only for the postman to read. As for the heart time, is smell and sound. The smell of tea on the paper. The papers rustle when folded. Mai stayed at the post office longer than she had planned. She asked if she might help arrange the envelopes, wipe the stamp, sharpen the pencil, and write down the recipients' names in the ledger. He agreed immediately. He told her, doing things by hand, you will find your own breath. At first, she was clumsy, doing things in haste just to finish. He reminded her to slow down. He showed how to stack envelopes so the edge is not too thick, how to tie string so the corner does not scratch, how to place the letter into the box so it does not tilt. She followed and found it strange that those small gestures could still her heart, like the river early in the morning. At midday, they ate boxed lunch and drank light tea. He told her that many years ago, he also raced against time, writing announcements, typing documents, stamping express mail. Then one day, he sat at his desk and did not hear his own heart. He took leave and opened this wooden door. He said, expressing urgency by haste is a dangerous habit. Urgent matters call for a full breath. One rainy day, a young woman carrying her child came in. The baby had a mild fever, cheeks flushed red. She asked him to write a letter to her future self to remember that there was once a rainy night when she held her child in the old post office, listening to the sound of stamps falling into the metal tray like raindrops tapping on a tin roof. He nodded and wrote short, soothing sentences that read like a lullaby. He carefully noted the date and time, then sealed the letter in an envelope to be mailed back to her 1 year later. She left, cradling her child close to her chest, walking slowly. He watched her go, suddenly, recalling a long ago evening when he stood under an awning with his firstborn daughter in his arms, watching the rain. That night, he had promised to do something with both hands wide open. In the neighboring village lived an old carpenter who came by every afternoon. He never sent letters. He just sat quietly, sipping tea, sometimes placing a small piece of wood on the table and saying, "Listen and see what the wood wants to say, mister." Toan would lay his hand on it. Listen to the resin's scent and the sound that had long faded with time. He would say the wood wanted to become a drawer for holding blank paper. The old carpenter smiled and said the wood chose the right person. A few weeks later, a new drawer lay beneath the desk, smooth as water. Mr. Tone placed the thick sheets of paper inside and gently closed it, listening to the soft click, like a story finding its own period. Sometimes the night stretched long. At year's end, people would line up at the door. Everyone had something they wanted to send off to lighten their heart before stepping into a new day. He never turned anyone away, but always invited them to sit. He said sitting down was already half a letter. Once, a young man showed up drunk, wanting to write to a lover who had just left town. His handwriting was crooked, his sentences disjointed. Mr. Tone did not correct him. He simply placed his hand on the edge of the paper, holding it steady so it would not drift with the boy's heavy breath. The next morning, the young man returned, asking if he could write another letter, now that his mind was clear. Mr. Tone nodded, poured him tea, and handed him the pen reserved for thoughts that needed to be read calmly. The second letter was neat and quiet. The young man left lips moving in a silent thank you. He never quite spoke out loud. Mai gradually learned the language of empty space. She realized some letters only needed 3 lines. Line 1 described the morning's scent. Line 2 recalled a small sound. Line 3 laid down what needed to be released. She also came to see that some letters were long, but said nothing at all. Mr. Tone told her, "When you notice yourself repeating, 'Stop writing,' pour some tea, smell the paper, and listen to the clock, hand tapping against the wooden wall. When you come back, the words will find their place." She tried it, and it was true. She began writing to herself letters for the past and the future, and placed them in a small box on the new drawer. One beautiful afternoon, the post office received a return package. It was the letter Mr. Tone had once written for the middle-aged man to send to an old friend. The postal note said the recipient could not be found. Mr. Tone opened it, read it once, then closed it again. He was not sad. He called the man in, gave back the letter, and invited him to take a walk along the riverbank. They walked in silence. When the sun touched the red rooftops, Mr. Tone finally said, "Not every letter has to reach its destination. Some only need to get halfway there, because the sender has already changed." The man nodded and asked to keep the letter as a mirror. Mr. Tone said that kind of mirror did not need to be hung, just placed on a table under a warm light. Time flowed on. The old post office became a resting place for many passing lives. People came and went, leaving behind a chuckle, a tear, a green tangerine, a flower, or an old postcard as a thank you. Mr. Tone still sat there, hair whiter. Now, hands a little slower, but his eyes brighter. He read letters with his ears and nose, like reading a symphony, where each part carried its own tempo. He knew when a letter needed more white space, when to remove an exclamation mark. He understood people came, not only to send letters, they came to borrow a breath. During a long, rainy season, he fell mildly ill. Mai took initiative, opening the post office early, brewing tea, welcoming guests, logging names, stamping envelopes, tying string. He sat by the window, watching thin mist cling to the glass, and told her that one day this post office would be hers to watch over. She was taken aback. He smiled and said, "To watch over is not to guard. To watch is to listen. To listen is to hear. To hear is to write. And writing is how one heart finds a path to another." She said nothing, feeling that sentence circle far and return to settle in her chest. When he recovered, the post office seemed to glow a little brighter, perhaps because people brought more stories. Someone from afar sent a postcard showing a tree-lined road with a short note saying they had read their own letter after a year and felt at peace. Someone returned a pen they had borrowed with a blessing. Someone brought a bouquet of sweet herbs, saying they wanted the scent to linger in the post office a few days so that the words might carry a bit of meadow fragrance. On the night of the full moon, he closed early and invited Mai to bring chairs down by the river. They sat in silence, watching the shimmering water, listening to distant oars. He told her that in his youth, he had once written a letter to someone he loved, but never sent it. He kept the letter close to his chest for years, and on a day of heavy rain, he burned it, watching the smoke rise and turn into words. He said, "Some letters are born to be sent, some are born to be kept, and some are born to be written, and that alone is enough." Mai asked if he regretted it. He shook his head. He said, "If you do not send it, there will be no reply. But the most important reply is how your own heartbeat slows while writing it." Later, the post office received a letter addressed simply to the old post office by the river. Inside was one sheet of paper with 3 lines. "The scent of the day is rain warmed by sun on a wooden desk. The quietest sound is a stamp touching a copper tray. What needs to be released is the habit of speaking in place of the heart." Mr. Ton and Mai read it and smiled at each other. They did not need to know who had sent it. They placed the sheet in the drawer, opening it each morning to read like a prayer. The story of the letter writer at the old post office has no ending. Every time the wooden door opens, the story begins again with the soft clink of wind chimes, the scent of steaming tea, and a blank sheet laid quietly on the table. Someone will sit down, place a hand on the edge of the table, take a breath, and begin to speak. The other hand will take up the pen, move slowly pause just right and place the period in its proper place. The envelope will be sealed with a gentle press. The date stamp will blur halfway, then sharpen, and the letter will go. Maybe it will arrive, maybe not, but it will have crossed the bridge. A bridge from one heart to another, built with slowness, with scent, with sound, with empty space. And when someone walks down the riverside street and sees the wooden door half open and hears the soft breathing of paper, if they stop, they will know there is still a way to say what must be said in the gentlest way. Because somewhere, someone is always waiting to help words from the heart find their way far away. Thank you for staying until the very end of tonight's journey. If you are sitting in a quiet room right now, with only the soft breathing of the wind, take a moment to breathe deeply and see if your heart feels just a little more at peace. Each story shared on this channel is not only for you to hear, but for you to rest, to slow down, to breathe alongside life's simple things. Because sometimes all it takes is a gentle voice, the sound of wind brushing over a tiled roof or an old story, and suddenly we find a piece of peace we had lost somewhere along the way. If you feel that these stories have touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel so that each night I can sit with you again and share another quiet story, as kind and warm as a cup of tea that still holds its heat. I wish you a peaceful night. Close your eyes and let your soul rest. We will meet again in the next meditative stories.